Good afternoon. My name is Mayan Crivachet and I work at Gutman Library. I'm so excited to welcome all of you to Class Dismissed, our first book talk of the academic year. Before we begin, I would like to introduce Richard Murnane, an economist and a research professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. Professor Murnane will say a few words before we begin. The chat feature is only enabled for the speakers to communicate with the audience, but we encourage all of you to utilize our Q&A feature to ask your questions. Professor Murnane, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Mayan. I'm delighted to introduce Kevin McIntosh and Carla Baer. A special treat for me because I've been learning from Kevin for a decade and from Carla for more than 2 decades. Both Kevin and Carla have had distinguished careers in education. Kevin recently retired after a career of teaching English in middle school students in Oakland, New York City, and Dover, Massachusetts. He's published many delightful short stories. Kevin and I have been members of the same book club for 10 years, which has provided many opportunities for me to observe Kevin's keen insight about a great many books. Carla also started her career in education as a middle school and also high school teacher. She chose a different path from Kevin's and moved to a variety of leadership positions, including serving as superintendent of public schools in Wellesley and then in Lowell. From there, she moved to leadership positions in the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I met Carla in 1993 when she was superintendent of schools in Wellesley. She allowed me to study and write about a fascinating grade 4 science curriculum that provided students with opportunity to develop a wide set of important skills. Carla's support of our research gave her a special place in my heart. Enough from me, over to Carla.
Thanks, Dick, and really nice to see you again. And hi to Kevin, my friend, part of literally my extended family. And so it's I've watched this book emerge from your teaching and from lots of conversations we've had about your short stories and other things. So anyway, so I love this book. I'm delighted to be here, and I thank Gutman Library and the Ed School for giving us this opportunity. So as I said, I love everything about this book. Not the least of which is that you finished it, Kevin, after 20 plus years, starting from your short stories, and that Regal House had the wisdom to publish it. So I'm glad the world is getting to see it now. You want to start us off with something so we get a little flavor of this novel of yours?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you to the Gutman Library, to Mayan, Dick, and Carla. This is great to have you here, and all of you who've shown up today. I want to begin with we're reading from the first chapter. Class Dismissed begins in Minnesota, takes place in the mid-90s. And all you know at the beginning is that this is the end of a school year, of a long school year on a hot day in 8th grade classroom, and that the teacher, Patrick Lynch, taught previously, recently in New York City. That's kind of all we know. This is his writing workshop. These kids are presenting things. Write what you know, he tells them, and they do. They do. Patrick leans back in a student desk in the last row, his shirt slick against the plastic. He tucks a bit of shirt tail in, and the sweat that is pooled above his belt trickles below. 20 more minutes of reviews of horror movies, boy bands, skateboard brands, teen clothing lines, and he can plop himself onto the lime green sofa beneath the air conditioner in the teacher's lounge. Eric Lindstrom is next. He shifts from foot to foot, swaying rhythmically, pulling at his dress-length Timberwolves jersey, plucking at his spiky red hair. Boys sway more than girls, and Patrick tries to alternate genders at these year-end readings, lest he gets queasy. Eric's review of Death Match 3, the computer game he got for his 14th birthday, is also full of specific, relevant details. Eric is tiny, half the size of the largest 8th grade boys, but Zoltar, hero of Death Match 3, is massive. His biceps, awesome. And when he swings his two-headed axe, enemy heads spin through the air like so many basketballs, the blood spurting vividly, aided by twice as many pixels as they used in Death Match 2. The boys are captivated by Eric's account. The girls shoot glances at Tiffany number 1, covetous of her long, shiny legs and the tight pink top that so cunningly matches her nails. Patrick stares at Eric, spouting gore in his half-changed contralto, and is amazed still at how well-behaved the students are at Lake Minnehaha Junior High. June 19th, the penultimate day of the school year, a day for battening down hatches, a humid 92 degrees, and yet they sit, if not attentive, respectable as only upper middle class Midwestern teenagers, weaned on politeness, could be. It's impossible not to like these kids, so hardworking, so well-trained. Not always kind, perhaps, but generally nice at an age notoriously cruel. A small wave of guilt bathes him, remembering the resentment he'd felt in September. Susan's voice was keening in his head then. Look at this place, he could hear her wail, hands planted on those slender hips. If she were here, she'd survey his 19 students, his sparkling classroom, with its just out of the box Apple computers, its crackling new textbooks. She'd follow him into the high buffed hallways, past the display cases filled with trophies and student art, and the supply room, pencil and pen boxes, staplers, markers, transparencies, rulers, folders of every size and color, and paper, lined, graphed, copier, reams of it, pallets of it, stacked from floor to ceiling. What do they spend? 10 grand a kid? Susan would huff. These aren't the kids who need it. She'd fling that long dark hair over a pale shoulder, daring him to debate the point, though of course, she knew he agreed. Then the eyes would narrow and out would come data on the socioeconomics of this community, the evils of funding schools through local property taxes. True enough, Susan, he'd answer her, answering himself. But you couldn't hold all that against these kids. Not their fault, being oblivious of their privilege, he thinks, watching Eric Lindstrom sway in his Air Jordans. No fault of theirs, being raised at the Mall of America.
Thanks, Kevin, very much. So that, where you read that from is from the first chapter, right?
Right.
And the title of that is Write What You Know. Write
Yes.
What You Know. You want to talk about Write What You Know and how that may speak to how you wrote this book?
Sure. So I recently retired after 31 years of teaching mostly English and mostly writing and reading workshops, kind of in the Nancy Atwell vein, who was very much a mentor for me, as for many. And and I taught in Oakland, the Bay Area, for a couple of years, moved to New York City in the mid-90s, early 90s, taught to the mid-90s, from whence comes this novel, for 6 years. And then to the greater Boston area, to suburban Boston, where I taught for over 20 years. So a really wide range of kids, right? Every socioeconomic group. And that's something I think is distinctive about this novel is, there are your prep school novels, right? And your inner city novels, but this kind of spans the whole gamut, of public school experience. And certainly my experience teaching writing had a huge influence on me as a writer myself. And my students inspired and goaded me into writing. And Dover Sherburne school system funded me to go to Breadloaf one year. And that kickstarted my writing to a great degree. So there's been a great symbiotic relationship between teaching and writing and being a writer.
Great. And when you write a novel that's got a protagonist who is similar to you in background and in teaching, and you set the novel in places very similar to what you directly know. What is the difference here between a novel and an autobiography? How did you go about thinking about taking your experience and turning it into a novel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess some novelists really begin with, sort of memoir and then fictionalize it. I don't feel that I do that as a writer. I could not have written this book without my experience as a teacher, certainly. And it draws on that experience. I am not the protagonist, I want to say. And the people in my book are not, people I know. They're very much composites or just made up. That's really important to say. But it certainly draws on that, and is informed by that. I really could not have written this book without having had that lived experience, as a teacher, certainly.
Well, that's really clear, because the novel is filled with really vivid pictures of faculty meetings, faculty rooms, conferences with assertive parents, after-school tutorials, and classroom after classroom scene, where you really lay out, it seems to me, the challenge and the joy of teaching. That comes through. I assume that was intentional.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I hope it does come through. I love teaching. I love teaching kids. I love teaching 8th grade, which I taught them for most of my career. The 8th graders are thought of as the redheaded stepchildren of education, with all apologies to redheads and stepchildren in the audience. But they're great. They're just, they come full of beans every day. They challenge you. You gotta really prove yourself every single day with 8th graders. Little kids, younger kids want to love their teacher, and you're sort of literally in loco parentis. High school kids, they may like you, they may not, but they know they got to get their ticket punched, and they'll sit for it. 8th graders are like, bring it on, show me, and I love that challenge. They're just full of beans, and the give and take, and once you prove your stuff, they'll follow you anywhere. And my students did. They wrote everything, every kind of thing, and we wrote every genre. We wrote plays and essays and memoirs and short stories and critical essays, reviews. We wrote everything, and they were just very forthcoming. And I think one of the things I try to show it with Patrick Lynch, the protagonist of this book, is that it's a very intimate thing, teaching, right? It's a very vulnerable thing, teaching, when it's good. It's only good when it's intimate, and it's only good when teacher and student meet each other halfway. And one of the things in this book with the protagonist is that he's very much an outsider. So the challenge for him, right, of meeting his students halfway in New York, he's an outsider because he's a Midwesterner in New York City. He's a small town boy in the city. He's a white teacher in a mostly a color class. And then when he goes back to Minnesota, where he's from, but he's from a farm town, he's teaching in an upscale suburb. So he even feels like an outsider there. So it's very much about that, and about the challenge of coming to your students and meeting them halfway, right? And revealing enough of yourself that you're human to them.
Yeah. And in your novel, you certainly give Patrick plenty of challenges. Teaching challenges.
Right.
I wonder if you've got something you want to share with us, read for us, that presents one of those challenges, because I think those are particularly rich parts.
Indeed, thank you. So this next scene is when he's in New York, and it's kind of flashing back to this particular scene, flashing back to his first day on the job in New York, in this first mini school he lands in, and so which was very much a development of the 80s and 90s in New York, and so he's been left in the book room, which is a famous New York place, and I think Frank McCourt wrote about book rooms, and where it's everybody kind of finds what they can to teach, and so he's not really been told what he's going to do, but so he's left by the vice principal, Mr. Kupchak, to look around the book room and try to figure out what's what. The book room, he would soon understand, was management's answer to having no syllabus, no state frameworks, no clue as to what he would be teaching. Marcus Garvey, like many warehouse-sized high schools in New York, had been broken into thematic mini schools in the early 80s. After the federal government told the city to drop dead in the mid-70s, the chancellor decided to let the 100 flowers bloom. Anyone with an idea, a space, and a connection at the DOE central office at 110 Livingston Street, Brooklyn, could jolly well set up a mini school. The first mini schools, dedicated to the disciplines of art, math, technology, focused on self-explanatory curricular needs, but as time passed, their themes grew more fanciful, abstruse even. Patrick had landed in Experiment in Cooperative Learning, a program that had recently lost its director, most of its students, and its way. What it did have was 4 classrooms at Marcus Garvey, nominal oversight by the principal and vice principal, and access to the book room. Once it became clear that his first day tour of Garvey was over and that Mr. Kupchak was never returning to the book room, Patrick braved his dust allergy and began the nasty business of sorting through the novels. But the deeper he got in the stacks, the more dust filled the air and the more he sneezed, sending ever larger clouds billowing across the book room. He blew page 217-18 clear out of an ancient copy of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, sparing Tess the cruel advances of Alec d'Urberville, which was more than Hardy ever did for her. It seemed arbitrary which would be the lucky first book to begin his experiment in cooperative learning, but this choice was made simple in one regard. Only a single novel had a usable class set. Unfortunately, that novel was Joseph Conrad's Lord Jim. Patrick sat cross-legged on the book covers, rocking, holding his head, sneezing. Why, oh why this book? He could picture his tortured adolescent self slogging through this novel on his bed back in Peterson's Prairie, counting the pages still left to be read, waking to the smell of its musty text, chapter 5 sodden with drool. What idiot had chosen this, and why? But as a rookie teacher hopelessly overmatched by his situation must, he made peace with it. Okay, stuffy colonial British story, tea drinking, stiff upper lips, ridiculous vocabulary. But sea disaster, linked to Titanic, implicit violence, a fair amount of boozing. And, he further rationalized, wasn't there a certain fitting irony, inspirational maybe, teaching immigrant kids an English novel by a Polish author writing in his third language? All rationalizations dissolved in the face of the realities of the experiment in cooperative learning. Cooperative learning, it turned out, involved replacing students seated in neat rows with participants slouching on randomly placed sofas. The participants were not required to remove their hats or coats or to address their facilitators by other than their first names. Process, not product, was the thing at EICL. We're all co-learners here. No one has the right answer. EICL was the dumpster program at Marcus Garvey. The Computers for the Future program had a waiting list, as did Math in the Real World. Mothers clutching false addresses lined up outside the Science and Technology Academy on the first day of school, trailing all the way out to the 103rd Street Deli. Security was called from down the hall when the office doors opened, and the line devolved, half queue, half scrum. No such measures were necessary when EICL opened its doors. EICL was for the leftovers, just off the boat, just out of juvie, just out of luck. It was the dumpster program, and everyone, parents, students, teachers, knew it. Everyone except Patrick Lynch, desperately clutching his 19th century British novel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, listening to that, there's a way in which your novel is also a little bit of a historical novel. Around a time and a place for education and education reform, et cetera. How did that inform how you came at this?
Well, that's really interesting because as you know, and as Dick knows, I spent many years working on this, and in between other things, writing short stories, raising children, teaching children. But from the first moment of inception, I would say till this moment, it's about 20 years. So I would say it's more of a historical novel than it was when I started it, but it certainly reads that way now, which is an interesting thing. And as I was doing the later edits, I had to take that into consideration, right? Because there are things that are kind of more in the rearview mirror now than there were then. Here's a good example. So there is a slightly oblique reference to the then powerhouse mayor of New York City, one Rudolph Giuliani, who was a formidable figure, certainly, right, in the early to mid 90s, and taken it very seriously. Perhaps reads a little different today than he did then. But so that's kind of funny, right? When I read that now, I'm talking about an earlier time, though I must note the second Mrs. Giuliani, not the one who was his second cousin, but the second Mrs. Giuliani, did come through my classroom and in her red Republican cloth coat, and did a sort of, queen-like wave at my class. My children kind of nodded like, who's the lady in the red coat, and I had to explain. And then she went on. And in my novel, the chancellor makes a similar, right, kind of royal visit, but that's drawn a little bit on having Donna Hanover was her name, Mrs. Giuliani, the second Mrs. Giuliani, come through my classroom. So so that does get a sort of historical feel, doesn't it?
Yeah. And the ed reform pieces, there's
right.
You've got a scene in there where Patrick is grading citywide writing exams, and so sort of those early efforts were going on then, right? Absolutely
right. And there was great stress at that time, as there is in the inner city, right? To have your kids hit home runs, right? To show evidence of learning on these standardized tests, which, having taught in the suburbs, at one of the top schools, really, right, in the Commonwealth, I would say, and taught in a mini school, which was the one I taught in, was also quite good. But, the kids don't come to the table with, the same background. And of course, those tests, as we know, are written for those kids in the suburbs. And, so it was just so stressful in the city, preparing kids. I remember that for citywide writing tests, because so much was at stake, it felt like. And I'll never forget one of my last years there, the new Stuyvesant High School was built in New York City. And, I was in 8th grade. So that was a real, that's when they took the exam, right? That entered for the exam schools. So there's a lot of pressure around your highest level kids. And I remember we always got, 1 or 2, I think, into Stuyvesant or Bronx Science or, Brooklyn Tech. But when the new Stuyvesant came in, all of a sudden, kids who would have gone to white prep schools started going there. It was like, oh, now it's worth going to, which I remember just, a couple of our kids missing by like a point or 2. Yeah, exactly. And the injustice, look on their faces and the injustice of that, right? I mean, as if there's a level playing field, right? Between a kid who goes back and forth between the Dominican Republic and, his parents maybe don't speak a little bit of English and there are not many books at home and, right? this sort of thing versus some kid who's been prepared all his life, for that sort of thing. It, just broke my heart and enraged me, and it still does.
Yeah.
Still does. Yeah. That's part of what the book's about, I would say.
Yeah.
Class dismissed, it's very much about class.
Yeah. You bring, Kevin, you bring to the novel, I think, such a deft touch with race and class, religious difference, regional difference. And I was struck by how kind you were. There are no stereotypes here, right? And there's a kindness that you bring to it. But I wonder how you thought about that in the writing process of wanting to bring the full humanity of your characters to play.
Yeah, I think of myself as a character writer. The writers focus on different things, right? Some people are plot writers, and some people write, are place writers. Character is so important to me as a reader and as a writer. I was told my students this, if you're writing a story, and I don't think the reader has to love your characters, right? They don't have to be likable, but they have to be invested in them. They need to be three-dimensional, and when someone is three-dimensional, you do care about them. There are some characters in here who I think aren't likable on the surface, but hopefully you see them in enough dimensions, right? And you see them in enough situations that you get their motivations for doing what they do. You see their humanity, I think. And I know I really, as I reread it many times, I always thought, if a character seems, I hope there are no villains in here. I don't mean there to be any, or heroes for that matter, right? That's not how life is. And certainly education in general, and especially in a huge city, feels like, there's this maelstrom going on all the time, right? And everyone's just kind of hanging in there, doing the best they can.
Yeah.
And hopefully that comes through.
Yeah, super. You have another piece. You have a real challenge in the novel to speak to unions and union leadership. That's a whole piece in the novel.
Indeed.
I wonder if you want to share a piece and then talk a little bit about it.
Sure. So Patrick is in the lunchroom, this tiny lunchroom at his school, his mini school, and so he sees two men who are the old bulls, who've been there forever, and are the union reps, and perhaps seen a little bit through the eyes of a young teacher who perhaps resents them, but here you go, he's looking at them. Though the men on the couch were a contrast in appearance, they shared a bedrock belief. Everything used to be better. They seemed, to Patrick, airlifted from an earlier New York City, one he'd seen on television and in movies back in Minnesota, an Irish, Italian, and Jewish city, one with 3 baseball teams, with goofy, lovable cops, and sophisticated women who shopped Fifth Avenue in white gloves, and men who wore dark suits, skinny ties, and hats, not caps. Nothing in the past quarter century had altered their vision of this city. In their New York, Jack Kennedy was president, Mickey Mantle roamed the Yankee center field, the children were well-dressed, well-behaved, and white. They refused to make concessions to the realities their current students faced. Any deviation from the standards set in the golden age was unacceptable, to be railed against. Their every utterance was complaint, their expressions in repose dyspeptic. If they'd ever been educators, Patrick thought, they weren't now. They were kid haters, screamers, so burnt out that younger staff referred to them only by their nicknames, Crispy and Extra Crispy, or simply C and X. Maybe you could talk to Silverstein about the dress code, C smirked at the lunch table. He's pretty good about those things. X gurgled in amusement. A visitor stumbling into the teacher's lounge would have looked C and X over and concluded that these haggard figures were marginal to this system, subs perhaps in for the day. The visitor, however, could not have been more mistaken. True, C and X had little to do with teaching and learning, which the public is led to believe are the core activities of education. But C was the building's union rep, a job he had inherited from X. If there was a prince of this little city, C was it, and X his trusted advisor. Now, Patrick was a union man. Weren't they all? How could you not be? The union had paid for the crown on his number 3 molar, the contact lenses he wore. If not for the union, he would have spent this all too brief lunch period trying to keep several hundred young people from hurling macaroni-based products at one another in the cafeteria. He was grateful for every benefit, every right collective bargaining had wrung from the system. But at the building level, the union was a protector of the most senior and least motivated. Brian Callahan, who insisted on keeping room 117, the room nearest the exit, and some said the bars on Amsterdam Avenue, in perpetuity, regardless of how many times younger faculty were forced to shuffle rooms around him. Luisa Maldonado, who refused to go on field trips and would spend the day sipping coffee in the teacher's lounge, while a younger colleague was drafted to schlep her class to the aquarium at Coney Island. C and X reserved the cushiest assignments for themselves. X, having taught math for countless years, now presided over the library, a room with few books and fewer students. C, head of the social studies department when Garvey had been one school, had restyled himself as a reading specialist. Now he tutored 1 or 2 students several periods a day in his former office. The other periods, he received petitioners, the Callahans and Maldonados, weighing their grievances like a little Italy Don.
Thank you.
Perhaps a jaundiced view of the teachers union, but you know.
That's it. Well, it's matched by an occasionally jaundiced view of principals and administrators. So I'm good with I'm good.
Yes, everyone takes their licks, but everyone gets their due, I think.
Exactly. I think that's one of the.
And there's a union lawyer who winds up being a little bit of a heroine later on.
Absolutely. Kevin, you said you're a character writer, more in the plot. You're also a playwright in your earliest days before you turned to short stories. Maybe you would share with people a little bit about the playwright sensibility and how you brought that to, particularly to the classroom scenes. So I think what's very unusual in your novel is how you bring to life the complexity of the craft of teaching in the moment in the classroom.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I did actually right out of college, in college, and then after college, I would start as a playwright at the Playwright Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I was the kid playwright. I wrote a play for my thesis at Carleton College, and then it was accepted at the Playwright Center, where they had these fabulous playwrights who were all hired to workshop their plays. August Wilson had the office next to mine. He was an emerging playwright himself then, so it was a heady time to be there, to say the least. But although I did not go on to have August Wilson's career on the stage, shall we say, I learned a fabulous amount, from all of them and from that experience. And I think you're right. I think, I taught drama as well, and I've acted, and I think that sensibility does come through. And as many have noted, the classroom is a stage, right? And they said when I was a new teacher, you should be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. Although I would argue good teachers are both, depending on what the moment's called for. But there is a real sense that it's in real time. Anyone who observes, right, teachers, and I know you both have observed many teachers, right? It is sort of theatrical, and even if they're not yet the focus of it, right? Even if it's not like the teacher up there doing it, things are happening in real time. And Carla, I know we've had this discussion. You talk about in a good classroom, there's a sense of urgency, right? Stuff needs to happen, right? And in a bad classroom, or one that's not being taught competently, right? There's a lot of slack to it, right? There's no sense of urgency, no sense of something has to happen. and it is almost sort of dramatic, right?
Yeah.
Something, when I taught a great lesson, and again, even if it was a writing workshop where I'm not at the center of it at all, right? It's kids, having conferences, and there's this very dynamic going on of, not teacher-centered at all. But someone walk into my classroom, they'd have the sense of, whoa, stuff's going on here, right? And as I would tell my students at the beginning of the year, we're going to make some magic here, and if there wasn't that sense, there's something not quite right. And that's sort of like on stage, right? As I always told my students when we're writing plays, you don't talk about plays, playwrights don't talk about plays being good or bad. They say they work or they don't work, right? Highest praise, right, of a playwright to another is that scene works, and there is that sense. And I think that does inform my classroom scenes, right? That sense of the clock's ticking, right? Stuff has to happen. There's a million things happening at once, right? And there's a million things going through Patrick Lynch's head, as there is with any good teacher, right? With an experienced good teacher, you're editing, right? A mile a minute. You're prioritizing and reprioritizing, right? Oh, that worked, that didn't work. Oops, that was okay, but I'm gonna do this next period, right? You're doing it on the fly, and it's very dynamic, and it's very exciting, I think.
I think you capture so much of that in a number of the classroom scenes. You really capture that moment by moment decision, that plan A, plan B, plan C, and you give Patrick this reflection in the moment, so that you bring your reader in to the process of his decision making. I think it's just a marvelous way of portraying the gift of great teaching.
That's something I felt. Thank you. It's something I feel. Maybe that's why I need to write. Some people say you need to write the book you need to read, and although there are a number of teacher novels, right? So that's sort of a daunting great ones, right? Subgenre to enter. A couple of things that I felt that I hadn't seen were kind of this class dynamic, right? Of kind of the whole spectrum of teaching and how different it is depending on who you teach, where you teach. And also kind of the inner mind, that inner voice. I can't remember, that being in a novel to the extent that I wanted to see.
Well, and the inner voice of a teacher who really knows what he's doing in a classroom. I mean, who really knows pedagogy.
Right.
It's not reflection about mediocre teaching here.
Right.
It's
something that's interesting. An interesting tension, though, I think that somewhat explodes in the novel is Patrick Lynch is a 7-year teacher, right? And all of us having gone through the whole cycle of an educator, right? And having hired, right, educators, you look for that. But toward the end of my career, I was the department head, and if you're evaluating like racehorses or something, right? You get them at just the right age, and 7 years is beautiful, right? Because they've still got growth to do, but they're not rookies. They know a lot, they got some leadership stuff going on, maybe, right? Yep. If they're good, they're just kind of hit a new plateau, right? They've got more, but they're at a really good place. And in a way, he's feeling his oats a little bit, right? You can see in those first chapters in New York, like, I've kind of got this, not exactly knocked, but, I got a good place with my students, they respect me, I respect them. And then, stuff happens. But I won't. Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Super. but we can now go on a lot. But I want to give our audience opportunity to ask questions. So I think in the Q&A, anyone who's got a question for Kevin, just enter it in the Q&A, and I'll try to orchestrate MC that part of it. So we'll look and see what questions might emerge from that. Is there one more piece you want to read while people are thinking about questions they have?
Let's see here. Yeah. Here's the part where Patrick is preparing his class for the chancellor's visit, as I said, through like the second Mrs. Giuliani. Yeah. So, it's supposedly a spontaneous, thing, but they've been told in advance, get your classes ready, or else. So.
Well, that's never happened to me, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. Absolutely. So Patrick faced his second period. It seems we may have a little visit from the chancellor. Sly glances all around. We'll just keep discussing Mark Twain. Second period wasn't buying Lynch's understatement. Not after a week of subtle reminders and implicit threats. It would be a good thing to take Huck Finn home tonight and actually read chapter 34. A pop quiz on the Fugitive Slave Act isn't an impossibility. Patrick welcomed, yes, craved, the chance to show the chancellor and his posse room 234 in all its dilapidation. But he wanted his students to shine. Look, Mr. Chancellor, with your car and driver blocking traffic on 103rd. Look at the Afghan girls sitting in folding chairs borrowed for your visit. Look at the hole in the back window. Look at the clock that's correct twice a day. Look at the outdated textbooks with covers missing that begin on page 17. But for the love of God, listen, Mr. Chancellor. Listen to Maria's emerging Latina feminism as she critiques Aunt Polly's parenting. Listen to Jamar compare Jim and Malcolm and Dred Scott. Listen even to Julio, whose apartment in Washington Heights contains not a single written word, who is semi-literate in 3 languages, who would kill himself sooner than admit to his classmates that he tried, really tried, to read the first 3 pages of chapter 34 of a novel that could just as well be in Arabic. Listen, Mr. Chancellor, then imagine what we could do, then go back and do battle with the mayor over things that matter.
Thank you. I think folks want to just hear you, Kevin.
Oh, I can keep going a little bit. Second period wanted to look good too. Some classes, fourth period, forget about it. Had no pride. But second period, even Abdul, sat up a little straighter when Silverstein flitted through. They didn't want to be caught caring, but they did. It was important, however, to let them think they were getting over on the system. Mr. Lynch could rag on them, study, study, study. There's a test tomorrow. It's not magic. Come prepared and you'll see results. Till the number 2 express ran crosstown. Jamar, Angela, Hajira aside, he was talking to himself. Ah, but take a copy of that same test, crumple it up a little, find a sneaker in the lost and found, and make some dusty shoe prints on it. Leave it under Abdul's desk for him to find the day before the exam. Now they would spend the evening doing what Patrick had wanted all along. Patrick tried not to smile at their smugness as he handed out the tests. Tom Sawyer himself would have been proud. One could get too clever with these strategies, Patrick discovered his first year teaching. He'd planted a 10 spot in the text of an ever-sleeping student, then plucked the book off his desk, opened it, and waved the sawbuck in front of the class. You never know what treasures you'll find in a book, he crowed, then watched helplessly as they dismembered a complete class set, pages swirling to the floor like so many autumn leaves.
Kevin, someone's asking if you had several, you have several laugh out loud scenes in the novel. And did you intentionally write for humor? How did you figure out those?
Yeah.
How did you come at humor? Because you wanted your humor to be kind.
Yeah, right. Good question. Yeah. I think everything I write has humor in it. I don't consider myself a humor writer per se. You know, there's some people who write comic novels and they set out to do that, kind of like literary stand-up. I don't write that way. I don't think that way, but humor is laced through everything it's the way I think. It's very native to me, Irish American, I guess perhaps it's partly cultural. My family was very much that way. Yeah, so even things that are pretty dark, you know, I come from a family that, you know, makes jokes at a funeral, you know, sort of thing.
Right.
You know, that's just my sensibility, I think. And, you know, but there's a question of tone there, right? That's an important thing.
Yeah.
You have to find the right tone. things can become really disrespectful, right?
Mhm.
Or you can feel like you're slighting something or somebody, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If the wrong tone is adopted. So I edit it very carefully for that. As I always told my students, humor is hard to write, and that requires more editing than anything, really.
Kevin, two different questions about learning. One, what did your lead character, Patrick Lynch, learn about himself through the course of the novel? Especially, what did he learn about himself as a teacher?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. He learns a lot about himself. One thing that occurred to me in writing it, for so many years and rewriting it, was that in some ways it's a coming of age novel, which is kind of a funny thing to say about a 30-year-old, but young men mature a little bit slower, as a lot of women have noted. And certainly his girlfriend in his notes. But so, he really does learn a lot about himself through a crisis he goes through. And, it becomes about his family, his relationship with his father, and some unresolved issues from his adolescence that he never really dealt with, that he's kind of forced back on. And I think with his students, his teaching career is in jeopardy, and it's one of those things of you really start to value things, right, that you take for granted. And I think he really comes to, I think he really does appreciate his students, but I think he becomes self-aware, right, of how much he loves his students, in a way that he wasn't, that he didn't realize.
Someone's asking this very interesting question, Kevin, about did the process of writing this, and your process of writing, give you time to reflect on your own teaching? And if so, what insights did you gain?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it really did. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I can attest to that from our conversation.
Yes, it really made me think about my own practice, right? And and this is a book that does take a fierce look at teaching in some ways, right? Hopefully it's sympathetic and fair, and certainly the protagonist looks very hard at himself and is forced to look really hard at himself. And I think, especially when I really started finishing this novel, was at the end of my career, right? And I read that about those two burned out guys, right? C and X. I practically had written on my wall, "Don't be those guys," because really there's different challenges at every part of your career, right? There's the first third of your career where you're just kind of learning your craft, right? And you're kind of getting your chops together and, hopefully building a little respect for your self-respect and respect of your, your colleagues and your students. And then there's sort of the middle part where you're consolidating that and building on it and maybe entering into sort of leadership roles. And then there's that last part, right? Where hopefully, you become a mentor, right? And a leader, and and you take it to a higher level. Mm-hmm. And I know we had many conversations about this. And really, when you, but also there is that you can become burned out, right? Or you can just, even if you're in a really good school with really great kids and great, administration, when you're doing, right, teaching the same thing for over 20 years, how do you keep it fresh? Yeah. To get back to the drama, the theater analogy, right? Yeah. A little bit like being an actor. It's like, well, you've done your 800 performance of it, right? Yeah. But so that was a real challenge. And I remember the great actor Nathan Lane, someone asked him that question of, how do you keep it fresh? And he said, I remember when I was 10 years old and my mother took me to see Hello, Dolly on Broadway. And I saw Carol Channing and I thought, that's my life. That's what I want to do. And he says, I try to remember every single night that this may be my 800th performance of this play, but there's some kid out there who maybe has never been to a play before, right? And I can be that for that kid. And sort of as a teacher, I tried to hold on to that every day. I never phoned it in. I always, I was always like, keep it fresh, find something that, keeps that energy up and the interest up. So, that this spurred me on to do that, to a great extent. And I would share parts of my drafts with my students as I was writing it. And they kept me going too. They were like, when are we going to see this book, Mr. McIntosh? You know,
Right.
they challenged me, you know, they really
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. We have time for one more question. I'm going to go for it. So, so this is a shifting gears. Over the time of your teaching career, did any of the reforms actually improve conditions for your teaching?
Oh, this is a sensitive topic since I'm speaking to, you know, a school administrator of the highest level and to
We've certainly had these
Dick
conversations.
Murnane, who has researched this on the highest level. Yeah, so has it helped? You know, I would say yes, some things really do, you know, like learning, like having the freedom to do writing workshops for me changed everything, right? And that was kind of a new thing when I was new. And that was something that was spurred, I think, at the highest levels, to some degree, right? Process writing, that sort of thing. So some of it, yes, does filter down. Teachers can get pretty cynical about dictates from on high, right? And we have had this discussion many a time. And the view from 30,000 feet looks a little different than from the view in the trenches, right? And they need to interact, and there needs to be that interplay, and there's that tension. But you know, so I would say yes. I would say yes. So some of it certainly does filter down. And some of it, you just sort of shrug your shoulders and go, oh, they're there up at 30,000 feet, you know, having their little dog fight up there, right?
Right. What do they know? Yeah, exactly.
What do they know, right? There's the latest shiny object they're chasing, right? Teachers have those discussions, certainly, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you know, the novel, I think, does a way in which it is truly autobiographical, Kevin. The one part of it is Patrick is very demanding of himself as a teacher. That comes through in the novel really, really powerfully. And I know that you are as well. So this is teaching of the highest order, and Patrick aspired to that, and occasionally hit that note of when magic happens in the classroom. So
thank you.
This is a gift. Your novel is a gift to us. I really do think that.
Thank you. And thank you both for Carla, Dick, Mayanne, and Gutman for hosting this. This has been really fabulous. I just want to add, if you go to my website, kevinmmcintosh.com, I'll keep up to date on what I'm doing. If you want me to come to a book club or to your school to give a talk, or just know where I'm going to be next, that'd be great.
Oh, and I can also attest that on your webpage are some really interesting essays you've written recently about teaching, and sort of really reflecting on some of the really important questions of teaching. And I think you do it with you do that with your wit and the precision that is you.
Thank you.
Okay, let me say just a couple of closing words. First of all, thanking Carla and Kevin for really lively, interesting session. And to those of you who are still on board, take Kevin's offer seriously of coming to a book group. He's terrifically interesting to have as part of a group, as I can attest from once a month over 10 years. So thank you both.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.